I can't believe it's not butter.
James Earl Jones passed away last week at the age of 93. Jones was a titan of the American stage and screen, one of the most important performers of the last century. And look, we all know what the first line of any obituary for Jones is going to be.
You know, I've been in other movies. But you don't care about those, do you?
He voiced one of the most iconic characters in popular culture. And that's okay. There's a sense in which Jones himself was okay with this.
I have one thing to say to people like you. I like Star Wars too.
Darth Vader alone would be an impressive legacy for any actor. However, it speaks to the talent and the legacy of James Earl Jones that Vader is just one expression of what made Jones such a pivotal and important figure in the American popular consciousness. So we're going to try, this week, to explore what it is that made Jones so singular and unique. It's a daunting task, but we'll do our best. We'll try to articulate why Jones meant so much to so many people and how he spoke to multiple generations.
That's right.
For most actors, their voice is an instrument. For James Earl Jones, that voice was an orchestra.
Everything the light touches is our kingdom.
One of the more interesting aspects of Jones's childhood is that, as a young boy, he had a stutter.
I was mute from the grade 1 through freshman year in high school. Mute because I just gave up on talking. I can't cut it.
However, Jones had a rich interior life, expressing himself by writing poems. In high school, one of his teachers encouraged Jones to read those poems aloud as a way of overcoming his speech impediment.
There was a teacher who looked at one of your poems and said, "This is so good, I want you to prove that you wrote this."
Yeah.
It's insane to think that there is some alternate world out there where somebody like Jones never finds their voice. Looking back over the actor's life and career, such a possibility would be a tragedy not only for Jones, but for generations of audiences. I generally write and narrate these essays in the third person because I don't like to insert myself into these narratives, but I grew up with my own speech impediment. I spent my early years in speech therapy. I know what it's like to feel unable to express oneself, even in a small way.
Is this another example of you find yourself with a weak muscle and you exercise it? And sometimes that becomes your strong muscle.
Jones studied pre-med and enlisted in the army during the Korean War, but he retained an enthusiasm for the arts, especially the theater. He quickly garnered a reputation, entirely deserved, as one of the finest actors of his generation. In particular, his performances of Shakespeare and August Wilson plays are regarded as some of the finest in the history of American theater.
As long as you living in my house, you put a sir on the end of it when you talk to me. Yes, sir. You eat every day. Yes, sir. Got a roof over your head. Yes, sir. And clothes on your back. Yes, sir.
Jones made his cinematic debut in 1964 with a small role in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, and he would receive his first and only Oscar nomination in 1971 for his starring role in The Great White Hope, playing a role that he'd originated with the source play at the Arena stage. Jones was only the second African-American male performer to be nominated for an Oscar, after Sidney Poitier. To give a sense of the actor's prestige, Jones would play Malcolm X twice during the 1970s. When Rod Serling and Joseph Sargent adapted Irving Wallace's The Man, a 1964 novel imagining the first black president, there was only one actor who could play that role.
To kill a human being and come back here and feel persecuted because a black man in a high place refuses to accept the politics of a corpse as a measure of your innocence.
Now, we're going to talk a lot about Jones's voice, but it's worth acknowledging that he was always an interesting performer to watch, one capable of grand gesture and subtle nuance. He had a rare gravitas, which could be used effectively for drama, but also which he was willing to subvert for comedy.
I think he works there. My son works.
However, James Earl Jones' most lasting legacy might be his voice. It seems likely that millions upon millions of people who won't recognize Jones's name or face will instantly know his voice.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
While Jones was respected and admired as a legend of the American theater, he was perhaps beloved as a voice that spoke directly to children. Jones was instrumental, for example, in getting Sesame Street made. working on the shorts that were shown to children to test the potential format. Unsurprisingly, the short that apparently had the greatest impact on children was one of Jones simply counting to 10.
8, 9, 10.
There's a very literal sense that we would watch this man read the phone book.
Meow, 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 meow.
Jones would go on to appear on segments of the first season of Sesame Street, imprinting on a generation. Jones came by his famous role almost accidentally. He was hired quite late in the original Star Wars when George Lucas decided that David Prowse's distinctive accent just wasn't conveying the gravitas that he needed it to.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive!
So, Lucas made the clever choice of swapping out a distinctive supporting performer from Stanley Kubrick film for another distinctive supporting performer from a Stanley Kubrick film. Jones himself opted not to be credited on the first 2 Star Wars films, believing that his voice was ultimately just another of the movie's great special effects.
You have failed me for the last time.
Indeed, there's a solid argument to be made that the best change that Lucas made when releasing the special editions was to finally give Jones a screen credit on those 2 movies. Jones is selling himself short here by writing himself off as just another special effect. Just as Prowse's physical performance is integral to understanding Vader's character, Jones's voice work imbues the character with a sense of grand tragedy and complexity that goes beyond the written material, at least in the first film.
The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
And again, when writing and narrating an obituary like this, I find my own memories and experiences creeping in around the edges. Before I knew James Earl Jones by name or even by reputation, he was an intimate part of my childhood. He probably first spoke to me as the voice of Mufasa in The Lion King.
There's more to being king than getting your way all the time.
There's more?
Where he brought the movie such weight that he was the only cast member to reprise his role for Jon Favreau's recent remake, lending that movie a lot of credibility. When I encountered Jones again with the Star Wars re-releases later in the decade, his voice had come to represent both the best and worst ideas of what fatherhood could be to a prepubescent movie fan. There was always something reassuring and dignified in Jones's voice, some hint to even the youngest of viewers that there was a sophistication or complexity of the material beyond the thrills of mere spectacle. This is by far the least of the honors to be bestowed upon Jones, but I credit him with inspiring my younger self's love of Edgar Allan Poe. My first exposure to that great American writer was as a Treehouse of Horror segment on The Simpsons, narrated by Jones.
Once upon a midnight dreary.
While I pondered, weak and weary.
Now, that animated segment obviously played Poe's meditation on grief and madness as broad and goofy comedy, but Jones's bassy tones made it feel both profound and accessible to a kid who otherwise had no active interest in poetry or 19th century New England literature.
Quoth the raven.
Eat my shorts. Bart, stop it!
If Jones's performance as Mufasa in The Lion King opened up my young childhood mind to the joys of Shakespeare's Hamlet, then his reading of The Raven remains the definitive version of the text for me.
Perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door.
When we did one of these videos to mark the passing of Kevin Conroy back in the old company, I remarked that I know how much Conroy means to me because I still read Batman comics in his voice. So I know how much Jones means to me because I still read not just Poe, but a lot of poetry in Jones's voice. And I don't know that that speaks to the great cultural legacy of Jones, but I know that it means he meant a lot to me. And I think that sequence in The Simpsons was always the key to Jones. He never took himself too seriously.
Bring it home, Mufasa.
He never seemed to feel like he was above his audience or above his work.
But you cannot be a cinema actor and conduct your career like I've done and not end up in some of the worst movies.
He understood that sometimes it's fun to use that distinctive and memorable voice in service of a quick gag.
Ryan is a total Hottie McHotterson. Totes my goats.
However, while Jones never took himself too seriously, he always took his work seriously. No matter what the assignment, even in something like, say, Exorcist II: The Heretic, where he had to wear, well, this, Jones never felt like he was lowering himself to the level of the material. Instead, he was trying to elevate it to match his energy. He didn't always succeed, in large part because he was rarely in every scene of a movie. But there are very few actors who can get through a film like that with their dignity intact. What's more, if few actors could survive having to look like that on film, it speaks volumes that Jones's presence was felt even, and maybe especially, when he wasn't in the frame. The costume design and David Prowse's physical performance made Darth Vader distinctive and memorable, but it was Jones's voice that made him a fully formed three-dimensional character. Befitting that beloved and distinctive voice, Jones was a performer of rare depth.
She loved me for the dangers I have passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I have used.
Rest in peace. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.